Good day, friends. WordofGord here. Going to read a fairly political essay here. It's already been featured in Asemana Magazine, and I'm going to read it for you. From my bubble to yours, mind control made easy. It has become the custom these past few decades to express the notion in conversation or careful prose that we are, as a society, at least in the relatively free democratic West, quite able to hold opinions contrary to others in our community. Of course, vigorous disagreements abound and indeed make up the tenor of our times. More recently, the tendency has been towards distinctly uncivilized discourse in which the variety of opinions and attitudes has been drastically reduced to a noxious battle between opposing sides, often only two quite diametrically opposed. The rich and the poor, the right and the left, the white and the colored, and inevitably the righteous and the righteously wronged. The social media in its many forms has not only contributed but drastically amplified what we're now calling echo chambers, where we seem to only hear some semi-conscious group consensus of liberal, conservative, mainstream or dissenting, and all that is a commonplace understanding. One is either a dupe of mainstream media or some cockeyed conspiracy theory. The privilege of dissension from dogma and propaganda, mostly valued since Galileo, the Inquisition and the Reformation, has come under relentless attack. Mockery and character assassination have become the standard bearers of the advancing armies of conformity, whose obedience to government dictates and corporate insistence are as legendary as the rebels who refuse to roll over, to have their tummies tickled in the ongoing seduction. Since the 50s, when the trauma of war turned the survivors into well-behaved and happy consumers of the capitalist dream, where peace of mind, full bellies, and fertility and freedom from the earlier scourge of disease seemed finally within reach, the split between the sides became stark. Even pinches of wealth brought on the inevitable shadow of guilt for those not sharing or, in disgust, refusing to share. There had always been bohemian enclaves in cities, Greenwich Village and the like, but the obsessive cross-country driving and hitchhiking of the beats, powered by the same amphetamines pushed on the fighter pilots of the previous decade, seemed very far from the settled and sedate bisexual eccentricities of the Bloomsbury group of the 20s and the earlier Belle Epoque of the fashionable habitués of Parisian life. I entered the terrain in the 60s, when I left my teenage rock music paradise of the British decade 60s and learned to accommodate myself to the realities of North America, where civil rights wrangling, fiery riots in cities, politically motivated assassinations, bombings, and generally revolutionary fervor seemed to be at an all-time high. The contrast between the nascent and the psychedelic hippie counterculture and the boozy straight society of paychecks and families was remarkable. In my last year of high school, a freely chosen essay for history class led me to Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment, where it was plain as day that JFK had been gotten rid of as a nuisance to profit-making warmongering and his murder carefully disguised by the agencies of disinformation, whose nefarious actions had been carefully worked out internationally in the deftly arranged paranoias of the so-called Cold War. Later I discovered much the same patterns in the disposal of what we now call change agents like RFK and MLK. that major media would dutifully repeat the propagandistic lies of government and corporations, keeping up the act for decades, including the orchestrated neocon run-up to the Iraq War, seemed outrageous, especially in the face of repressive regimes who likewise perpetrated, but with more vigour and less shame. As a keen amateur researcher, I found the relative materials in Toronto bookstores, libraries and international magazine stands that carried the likes of the more obscure Covert Action, Quarterly and Prevailing Winds, along with the regular issues of Ramparts and Rolling Stone. Occasionally film put in its paddle, as with the doc, The Second Gun, showing quite clearly that Sirhan could not have authored the famous bullets, but that the security guard Caesar, hired only the day before, and now known to be connected to the agency, was in the right position. Produced by the Christic Institute, a small organisation peopled by folk like Danny Sheehan, now famous in that inimitable online fashion where podcasts pile up into small pyramids in no time, for his efforts in the UAP disclosure movement. It served to underline, in that guerrilla filmmaking tradition later exemplified by Michael Moore, the giant rifts between what was believed and what really happened. With the conspiracies and cover-ups of more recent decades now unravelling at a furious pace, the arm's-length proxy wars, planned plagues, and surreptitiously seeded civil wars, while shocking scandals and crimes catch our roving eye, again with the leap of the podcasting universe of deconstructing dissent, the notion that we are through the looking glass and on the other side is inescapable. One pill makes you larger and one pill makes you small, and the songs that Mother give you don't do anything at all. That's when you go ask Alice Wonderland, because you know she knows, the Alice of your intuition. Trouble is that the other side has many viewpoints. That other side, yes, seemingly contradictory, all of which Alice can spout while giggling. Of course, that's like regular life itself, whatever that has become in our wilderness of mirrors. It's now easier than ever to call out to the other bubbles of belief to mock, remonstrate, and disparage. As Nikhil Krishnan writes in a recent New Yorker article, Dirty Minds, quote, when the cousin you kicked a soccer ball around with as a child starts spouting unhinged certainties about viruses, vaccines, and climate change, beliefs he treats as beyond debate, you might wonder, what happened to him? Could he have been brainwashed? Don't get smug. He's wondering the same thing about you. The article covers 4 recent studies of brainwashing, all useful, but focuses mainly on Rebecca Lemov's The Instability of Truth. Having just watched her 2-hour conversation with that prince of podcasts, Joe Rogan, I feel quite in tune with the article's dissemination of her insights, much more so than I might have some years back with, say, a 3-column interview in some respectable journal. Much was freely discussed and differing viewpoints exchanged and chuckled over. As her work builds on what was recently revealed about the agency's MK Ultra and other assorted programs of mind control and psychic manipulation in Tom O'Neill's exemplary and groundbreaking research in Chaos, bringing even more skullduggery to light, I was able to plug right in and appreciate both her deeper research and Krishnan's appealing summation. He sees the maze of Cold War suspicions initially arising out of the ashes of the Nazi Reich, where the tattered victors soon began to distrust the impassioned ideological stances straddling the divide. The turning of US-Korean War captures into vocal supporters of the communist ideal, desirous of a new new life in Asia rather than the land of the brave and the free, sparked a terror in the nominally Christian capitalist enterprise that soon led to the various mind control practices on naive volunteers and the innocently unwilling. All well disguised by front companies and hazy finances. First from semi-official sources and then drug running and human trafficking. Of such miseries our offshore slush funds accumulated. With Lemov's theory of trauma as a precursor to brainwashing, Krishnan compares, quote, Morris Wells was starved and terrified as a Korean War POW, while Patty Hearst was locked in a closet and assaulted. Yet the question still arises. What does your average TikTok user been subject to that is remotely comparable? An irony arises, as they have a habit of doing. What Wills came to believe while residing in China, that socialism is better than capitalism and that the US is an imperialist power run by kleptocratic oligarchs, is now shared by many of the young who were subjected to nothing more than traumatic than a typical liberal arts education. And though their teachers would shudder that they might have been brainwashed them in the process, that's exactly what their conservative media critics have long been accusing them of. End quote. Of course, each side condemns the other's social media activity, quote, and naturally no one admits to doing what they denounce in their opponents. Persuasion is what we do, brainwashing is what they do, end quote. So reminiscent of that other quote credited to Audre Lorde in the pornography wars of some years back, where the bold statement, what we like is erotic and what they like is pornographic, has morphed into some kind of permanent meme. Whose ideology, whose propaganda, whose advertising, whose evidence, whose statistics, whose fraudulent proof, whose cherry-picked examples, whose righteous insistence, whose demands for transparency and justice, whose threats of surveillance, interference, and revenge. Who can be trusted to play the game? Who has to be dropped from the team, however unceremoniously? The mysterious deaths and disappearances. Old hat for mafia guys chomping down on homemade veal scallopini, but a brash new cap with a tacky slogan for the rest of us, sipping our craft beers and nibbling on sushi. Everyone now, from state actors to PR swaders, has 1 or 3 toll farms, trained to trot out the deceit and disinformation on awkward issues as they arise. Their files updated in real time like studio teleprompters. Commenting on the brainwashed soldiers of the Korean War, thought of as the time as hapless dupes, Lemov invites us to consider a newer parallel. The scorn directed at people who lose their savings to a cryptocurrency cult. She has something also to say about coercion under duress. When one interviewer questioned, quote, was she coerced or did she become a believer, end quote, she wonders why it could not work both ways, why not, quote, coerced into becoming a true believer, end quote. One can see that in these noxious dilemmas, it is often a case of both and rather than either or. As the surprise attack is mooted and then pushed into the planning stages, surveillance, always readily dormant, is activated through either psychic or high-tech avenues, often both, and foresight is kept to a limited cabal, while a second tier is trained to react with convincing shock and outrage, sufficient to schmooze the mainstream media into the compliance they care not to veer from. Pets trained to jump through hoops tied with ribbons, while reporters beyond the pale are permitted to let off steam, the steam that the chattering classes need to vent. Such venting helps prevent the explosions that the hidden elite finds harder to control. Blood on the rooftop just plain looks bad. Poisonous squabbling can soon be swept under the rug of the endless news cycle, saving more than a smidgen of face. The retaliation, of course, is carefully planned and structured to seem somehow panicked and ill-prepared. That the national pride built upon ancient tribal allegiances can again be sparked into action. Trust has been poisoned and honour betrayed. The conspiracies are generally cleverer than the cover-ups, often through the arrogance of getting away with it, and suffer through a myriad of leaks and whistleblowers that the canny can easily follow once family and career are tended to. The scuttlebutt now kicks around the planet with a digital ease that defies the shadow banning and guffaws of mockery from the payrolled trolls. We are left with a plethora of narratives from which we can choose according to our predisposition, and like the historians of our curated histories, yet debating the puzzles of the distant past, we pick through the telling details of deceit and fraud, the bad actors with the broken moral compass, obeying the dictates of their not-so-hidden masters, seeking the pattern we know is slumbering there. As Rebecca and others duly note, the pioneering of mind control was certainly jump-started by organized religion, whose true believers, humble disciples all, soon found themselves in the inevitable defensive hierarchy of lawgivers, demanding that their take on the prophet's life and wisdom was some pinnacle of truth, easily outstripping any myth or legend that preceded it. Hindu, Buddhist, pagan, Muslim, Christian, shape-shifting shamans, priesthoods circling the wagons around their castles of purity. One god, many gods. The marketplace of flavours had its fair share of sellers with their stalls, each on the lookout for the ever-increasing funding that comes compliments of market share. Believers, whether badgered, bullied, or lulled by sweet promises that their ignorance and suffering would later be rewarded, that patience and virtue would triumph. All this despite the endless massacres of heretics and the helpless who got in the way of the charge. The world stage was long set for the bloody theatre of heroes and villains, providing centuries of debilitating turmoil with the occasional oases of peace to catch one's breath, play chess, and sip fine wine. Those centuries stretch on, with round two being taken up by analytical rationalism and the much-lauded objectivism of science, persuasive at first as it battled the old order for space to freely express, but soon becoming redundant as it took up the reins of control and insistence that the religions had recently ceded, however reluctantly. Trust in the Bible or any ancient sacred text soon morphed into trust in the science. Priest and practitioners became interchangeable. Another Punch and Judy show with bigger budgets and more masters behind the curtain. Royalists and Republicans, capitalists and communists, believers and skeptics, progressives and conservatives. Cameras to watch baby, cameras to watch the front door and bird feeder, surveillance to watch the citizenry, satellites to survey humanity, ETs revealing themselves as they keep a watch on us. Everyone and everything observing and more than able to make up their own commentary. The carnival of narratives, stories we are told and stories we tell. Take your pick. Just try to remain outside your bubble. Sure enough, when you manage momentarily to step out for a refresher, it turns into another bubble. It would appear there is no escape. Even welcome death and that exhaustion of options reveals communities and individuals, all cleaving to their comfort zones of beliefs and cultural practice. Then, quote, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field and I'll meet you there, end quote. Here Rumi knows the, quote, world is too full of talk about while the idea of each other no longer makes sense, where even the breeze at dawn has secrets to tell. Yes, such meditation and contemplation, when deep and lasting, shows a multiverse of sentient beings, all with agendas for educative experience. The pause that refreshes would be the radiant void, the Elysian fields, the God consciousness, where all is formless and light and potential, where desire and ambition are empty of inspiration and resolution, where the bliss of non-being makes it case, and where the you that has somehow entered is devoid of any bubbles, and can see across time, space, and the rapture of dimensions, and know that nothing matters. Not really. There we can easily adopt the mantle of deity, making decisions that are often mistakes, while telling ourselves it's all an experiment in manifestation that can later be readjusted. Well, there you go. From my bubble to yours. Mind control made easy. And let me leap out of my bubble and back into some comfort zone that I've yet to define. Good day, friends, and we'll talk again. Word of Gord.